The blade pressed against her throat was ceremonial, not sharp, but the court did not know that. Empress Salith Vaughn of the Dominion of Kethara knelt on the cold obsidian floor of her own throne room, hands bound behind her back with silver cord, and she kept her eyes fixed on the one face in the chamber that mattered. Cole Vasic stood at the far end of the hall. He had not moved. 50 armed Ketharan wardens ringed him with lances drawn, and he had not moved, and the fact that he had not moved was the only reason half of them were still alive. The warden captain pressed the blade a fraction closer and addressed the galleries. The Empress has been compromised. Under Statute 41, the Council of Bloodlines hereby assumes temporary regency until further. Until what? Salith's voice cut through his like a wire through clay. Her throat worked against the blade's edge, but her words carried to every corner of the room. Until you finish the sentence you rehearsed with Consul Draven Sareth last night in his private quarters. Section 3, Clause 9 of that same statute requires the presiding counselor to declare a formal mental incapacity hearing before any regency transfer. Where is your declaration, Captain? Where is your quorum? Because I count 6 council seats in this room, and 2 of them are empty, and you need 8 for a regency vote. The captain hesitated. In the front row of the galleries, a tall Ketharan male with pale blue-gray skin shifted his weight. But that was the end, or rather that was 12 days from now. The beginning was quieter. The summons had arrived at the orbital station where Cole served as a structural engineer, one of 11 humans contracted to reinforce docking pylons along the Ketharan border trade corridor. It was unglamorous work. He spent most of his shifts welding joints in vacuum, replacing corroded bolts with fresh alloy, and filing maintenance logs that nobody read. The pay was decent. The silence was reliable. The work was honest, which was more than most things in the galaxy could claim. The summons was not addressed to him. It was addressed to the station commander, and it demanded the immediate transfer of the human male, Registry 4471C, to the Ketharan diplomatic vessel waiting at Dock 7. No explanation, no timeline for return. Cole's supervisor, a Relari with 3 good eyes and 1 scarred shut, handed him the printout and said, "Whatever you did, I hope it was worth it." He hadn't done anything. 2 Ketharan guards escorted him through Dock 7's airlock and into a ship that smelled like ozone and temple incense. They said nothing. He carried his duffel over one shoulder and his welding kit over the other, and they walked him down a corridor so polished he could see his own boots reflected in the floor. The guards stood 7 feet tall. Their gray skin had the faint, iridescent quality of metal that has been polished too many times, and they moved with the coordinated precision of predators who had been trained to walk like diplomats. The Empress of the Dominion of Kethara received him in a chamber of deep blue light. Salith Vaughn was 7 feet tall. Her skin was pale gray with a faint violet undertone that caught the light differently depending on the angle. Her eyes were large, dark, pupilless, reflecting the blue lamps like polished onyx. Her ears tapered to narrow points beneath hair the color of deep ocean water, swept back and held by a circlet of black metal. She wore layered robes of indigo silk, high-collared, severe, modest. Nothing about her was soft. Nothing about her invited approach. She stood behind a desk, not a throne, a working desk covered in data slates and diplomatic pouches and the remnants of a cold meal she had not finished. 2 advisors flanked her, one old and one older, both watching Cole with expressions that suggested he was an insect they were deciding whether to crush or catalog. "You are Cole Vasic," she said, "not a question." "Yes." "You repaired a docking clamp on the Vareth relay hub 4 months ago. Junction 9, berth 16. The clamp was failing. You replaced 3 primary bolts and welded a reinforcement bracket without authorization." Cole shifted his weight. The clamp was going to shear. If it sheared, the berth would have decompressed and killed everyone on the docked shuttle. "The docked shuttle," the elder advisor said, his voice thin as wire, was carrying the Empress's niece and her retinue. You were not informed of this. No. You saved the life of the imperial bloodline, Salith said, and you filed a maintenance log about it. Cole was quiet for a moment. It was a clamp. The younger advisor inhaled sharply. The elder one's eyes narrowed. Salith studied him from across the desk, and something shifted behind those dark, reflective eyes. Not amusement, not warmth. Something closer to recognition, the way a codebreaker stares at a cipher that suddenly resolves. The Dominion does not leave debts unpaid, she said. Your act preserved the bloodline. Under the Charter of Obligations, that act must be answered. The traditional answer is a position in the imperial household. A position, Cole repeated. You will serve as structural advisor to the Palace Engineering Corps for 1 solar year. Then your debt is considered settled and you are free to return to your pylons. 1 year, in the palace of the Ketharan Empress, surrounded by a species that stood a full head taller than him, moved with the coordinated precision of predators, and regarded humans as useful but ultimately disposable labor. Cole looked at the two advisors, both radiating disdain. He looked at the Empress, whose face gave away nothing. When do I start? The palace was called the Spire. It rose from the surface of Kethara Prime like a needle of black glass and silver, its upper tiers vanishing into perpetual cloud cover. The structure was 3,000 years old and had been rebuilt 4 times, each iteration taller and more ambitious than the last. Cole was given quarters in the engineering wing, a narrow room with a bed too long for him, a desk, and a window overlooking the city below. The Ketharan capital was a sprawl of elegant towers and suspended bridges, everything built vertical, everything reaching upward. Gravity was slightly lower than Earth standard, which made his steps feel buoyant and slightly wrong. The engineering corps did not want him. Chief Engineer Drellies, a Ketharan female with steel-gray skin and a voice like grinding stone, assigned him to ductwork inspections on his first day. Not structural consulting. Ductwork, crawling through ventilation shafts designed for beings a foot taller, checking seals, replacing filters. Cole did the work. He did it well. On day 2, he identified a stress fracture in a support beam on level 17 that Drellies' team had been monitoring for 6 months without acting on. He wrote up the repair procedure, estimated the material cost, and left it on Drellies' desk. Drellies filed it without acknowledgement. On day 3, he found a cracked coolant line in the sub-level climate system and repaired it before it could frost the Empress's private study. Nobody thanked him. Drellies logged the repair without his name attached. He ate alone in the engineering mess. The Ketharans sat in clusters, speaking their own tongue, and the silence around his table was deliberate and total. It was not hostility. It was erasure. He occupied space without being granted presence. The food was edible but designed for Ketharan metabolism, which meant the proteins were too dense and the carbohydrates were arranged in molecular chains his body processed at half efficiency. He lost 4 pounds in the first week and said nothing about it. On the 3rd morning, a junior engineer named Voss dropped a bundle of replacement filters at Cole's workstation without making eye contact. It was an assignment, not a courtesy. Cole thanked him anyway. Voss blinked, as if the word occupied a frequency he had not been calibrated to receive, and walked away. Cole installed the filters. He also noticed that the mounting brackets on the ventilation array were misaligned by 2 degrees, which meant the filters would degrade 40% faster than their rated lifespan. He corrected the alignment. He did not file a report about the alignment, because he had already filed 3 reports that week, and none of them had been acknowledged. On day 4, he found a second problem, worse than the first. A junction box on level 29 was routing power through a bypass that had been jury-rigged years ago and never properly repaired. The bypass was degrading. If it failed, it would take out environmental controls for 6 residential floors. Cole spent 4 hours tracing the circuit, mapping the failure cascade and designing a permanent fix. He presented it to Drellies. Drellies looked at the schematic, looked at Cole and said, "I will assign someone from my team to review your findings." The review took 3 days. The bypass failed on the second day. Cole had already installed the permanent fix 12 hours before the failure hit, working through the night without authorization, because 6 floors of people would have lost heat and breathable air, and because waiting for the review process to conclude was a luxury that physics did not offer. Drellies logged the repair. This time she included his name. On day 7, something changed in the mess hall. Cole arrived for his midday meal and found a small sealed container on his usual table. Inside was a portion of modified protein, reconstituted from a blend that matched human nutritional requirements more closely than anything the standard mess kitchen produced. There was no note, no name, no indication of who had left it. He ate it. It was the best meal he'd had since arriving. He did not mention it to anyone. The container appeared again on day 8, and day 9, and every day after that. Cole never found out who was leaving it. He suspected Drellies, because the container was the same make as the ones used in the engineering supply stores, and because Drellies, for all her stone-voiced authority, had noticed that he was losing weight and had decided to solve the problem the way an engineer solves any problem: directly, efficiently, and without requiring acknowledgement. The planet's electromagnetic output alone should have been the first warning. 40,000 years ago, Earth had radiated a faint smear of low-frequency noise. What the sensors showed now was not a smear. It was a wall, a solid, structured, layered wall of electromagnetic activity spanning frequencies the Cathari used for military-grade shielded communications. "That cannot be correct," said Dareth. "Run the calibration sequence again." She ran it. The numbers held. "Magnify the orbital shell," Voron said. The display zoomed. Earth had a ring, not a natural ring, an engineered structure, a continuous band of metallic construction encircling the planet at geostationary altitude. The ring's cross-section alone was wider than the Ascendancy's return was long. Sub-Commander Raylath stepped forward from the weapons station. "Cleric Commander, I am reading weapons platforms embedded in that ring structure. Thousands of them, siege grade. Note them, do not target them. I was going to suggest we consider retreat. But the vaults were here. If they retreated now, they retreated forever. We hold position, continue the scan." "The ring is not the only structure," Dareth said. "Large mass artificial objects throughout the orbital shell. Most are mobile. The smallest masses more than our entire convoy. Pull up the surface." The cities were visible from orbit, not as light patterns, as structures, towers that rose high enough to interact with the lower atmosphere, casting shadows hundreds of kilometers long. Entire coastlines rebuilt into megastructural terraces. Mountain ranges incorporated into architecture, their peaks crowned with installations pulsing with unclassifiable energy signatures. Between the city's ground-based defense installations, thousands of them, arranged in grids covering entire geographic regions. Dareth zoomed to one, a dome structure 2 kilometers wide with 8 radiating spines pulsing amber light. "Charged particle accelerators." "Ground-to-orbit weapons," Raylath said. "How many?" "Between 6 and 8,000, across all continental masses." The Ascendancy's home system had 43. "They were pre-space flight," Voron said slowly. "Tier 0. The communications console chimed. Dareth looked at it. Her lateral eyes went wide. "We are being hailed, in Cathari." Voron's blood ran cold. "That is not possible." "Old Cathari, liturgical dialect. They learned our language from the vault archives." "Play it." 340 crew members listened through the ship-wide channel. The bridge speakers carried a voice unmistakably not Cathari. The phonemes correct, the grammar precise, the vocal timbre too warm, shaped by a throat never designed for Cathari clicking harmonics. Cathari vessel, you are entering sovereign Earth space. Your mass signature matches a Cathari ascendancy pilgrimage convoy, as described in recovered records from Vault Complex 7. We have been expecting a vessel of this type for approximately 11,000 years. Hold position. Await escort. Do not activate weapon systems. This is not a threat. This is a protocol in place since before your current ship was built. Acknowledge. Every face turned to Voron. They had been expecting this. For 11,000 years. Whoever cracked the vaults had read the pilgrimage schedule, calculated when the next ship might arrive, and then waited. That was patience measured in geological time. Acknowledge. Inform them we are the pilgrimage vessel Ascendancy's return. No hostile intent. Requesting retrieval of Vault Complex 7 contents. The response came in 30 seconds. Your request is received. Vault Complex 7 was accessed, cataloged, and secured by the Earth Heritage Preservation Authority 26,000 years ago. Contents remain intact. Retrieval terms will be discussed aboard our station. Escort en route. Transit time, 4 minutes. Darath, what is the approach speed of the escort? Her jaw plates went rigid. They are not approaching from the orbital shell. They were already here. 2 light seconds off our port quarter, invisible to our sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. They were there when we arrived. How large? 3-kilometer class. A 3-kilometer warship had been holding station, undetectable since before they arrived. They assigned that to escort duty, Rayleigh said flatly. 3 times the length of anything we can build, and they use it for parking lot patrol. Additional contacts, Dareth said. 6 smaller vessels, also previously invisible, shadowing us since translation. The escort appeared, 3 kilometers long, hull layered like scales of a deep ocean predator, point defense emplacements in every gap. The ship's skin was its armament. No active emissions, no targeting locks. Massive and silent, it took position 300 meters off port. Ascendancy's return. This is the Earth vessel remembrance of shallow water. We will escort you to docking berth 17 on the equatorial ring. Welcome to Earth. The old pilgrimage ship began to move, towed by the human vessel's wake field. The approach took them through the orbital shell, and the orbital shell was a civilization, not a defensive perimeter. A functioning, breathing civilization built in the space between a world and its stars. Vast rotating habitats, industrial platforms the size of small moons, shipyards where hulls longer than the return were being assembled in open vacuum, their skeletal frames lit by the blue-white flare of construction welding. Traffic moved between them in organized streams, thousands of vessels of every size, following lanes the return's navigation computer could not fully parse. Rayleigh cataloged what he could, his voice quiet, mechanical. Patrol corvettes at the outer shell, 16 visible, each massing more than our escort skiffs. Cargo haulers between the habitats, civilian but carrying hull reinforcement that would qualify as military grade in any fleet I have served in. That cluster, those are fleet carriers. I count 6. Each one could deploy hundreds of smaller craft. He paused. Those are just the ones in this orbital sector. A junior navigator named Eseth spoke up. I am reading transponder signals from the civilian traffic. Thousands of them. Each carries a home port registration. I have identified home ports in this system and in at least 9 other star systems. Nobody responded. The facts were landing faster than the crew could absorb them. The Cathari Ascendancy, which had once ruled 30 star systems, was sitting in a pilgrimage ship, being escorted through a single system's orbital infrastructure that dwarfed anything the Ascendancy had built at its peak. As they neared the ring, a formation of 4 smaller human vessels peeled away from a patrol lane and took up positions around the return, 2 above, 2 below, matching velocity with precision that made the Ascendancy's own formation drills look sloppy. Honor guard, not threat containment. The humans were treating the return as a guest, not a prisoner. That distinction told Voron everything. The humans had decided long ago how they intended to handle a Cathari return. They had drilled it, rehearsed it, and handed it down through generations until it became reflex. They docked. The berth was too large for the return by a factor of 10. The docking clamps were gentle, precise, fully automated. The return settled into it like a rowboat entering a naval dry dock. While the clamps settled, Voron went to the observation port in the return's lower hull and looked down. Earth was directly below them. The entire visible surface had been layered with infrastructure so dense that it formed a second landscape over the original geography. Rivers still ran through the megastructures, their courses preserved and channeled through engineered banks, but the banks themselves were architectural walkways, service platforms, transit lines alongside water that reflected silver. Towers rose in graceful arcs, their surfaces textured with solar collection arrays and atmospheric processors, tall enough that their upper reaches pierced the cloud layer. Each tower was surrounded by connecting bridges and transit tubes, creating a three-dimensional lattice of habitation, extending in every direction. "Look at the ocean," Rayleigh said from behind him. The ocean beyond the continental shelf was not empty. Platforms dotted the water in organized grids, mining platforms, desalination stations, aquaculture facilities. And beyond the platforms, partially submerged, the hull of a vessel so large Voron had initially mistaken it for an island. A warship, docked in a coastal berth, its hull rising out of the water like a cliff face, its superstructure a skyline of weapon turrets. "That vessel is at least 4 kilometers long," Rayleigh said, "sitting in the water on the surface, next to a fish farm." The observation captured something essential. The humans had embedded their military in their civilization so thoroughly that warships sat next to aquaculture platforms and defense grids overlaid agricultural zones. The military was not separate from the civilization. It was the civilization. Protection and daily life woven so tightly that attacking Earth was not a military problem. It was an existential one. There was no civilian rear area to bypass. The entire species had built itself into its own fortress. A chime sounded from the airlock. Voron straightened his chest plates, a grooming reflex before formal meetings, and walked to the airlock with Rayleigh at his shoulder. A delegation met them. The humans waiting at the airlock were tall, taller than the survey images. They stood with a stillness Voron recognized from his military years, the composure of people who were armed and in control and did not need to prove it. Simple dark uniforms, no rank insignia, no visible weapons, no armor. The Cathari never went unarmed to a first meeting. The humans had come without weapons the way a mountain comes without defenses, because the question of threat had already been decided long ago. The leader was a woman, perhaps 40 years old by human reckoning, with close-cropped gray hair and a face weathered by something deeper than age. She looked at Voron with brown eyes that carried institutional patience, not her own patience, the patience of a system that had been watching and waiting since before she was born. "Cleric Commander Voron Sectalis," she said, in Old Cathari, in liturgical dialect, with clicking harmonics executed by a small device at her throat. "I am Director Anshin Marrow of the Earth Heritage Preservation Authority. I am the 407th Director. My predecessor maintained the Cathari Watch, her predecessor before her. We have maintained continuity of purpose across 406 transitions of leadership, 11,000 years, and 2 fundamental restructurings of Earth's governmental systems. Welcome." Voron locked his knee joints and dipped his head in formal acknowledgement. Behind him, Rayleigh exhaled a small sound that meant he had stopped calculating odds and started accepting the situation. "Director Marrow, I must tell you plainly that I am surprised by what we have found here. The Ascendancy's records indicated this world was uninhabited by any advanced species. We expected to find the vaults buried and unguarded, likely damaged by geological activity. We did not expect any of this. Director Marrow's expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, not amusement, not pity, recognition, as though she had expected exactly this reaction and had seen it rehearsed in simulations across centuries of preparation. Your survey was accurate at the time it was conducted, she said. 40,000 years ago, we were exactly what your records described. Pre-spaceflight, pre-unified government. We were burning fossil carbon and fighting territorial wars with chemical weapons. Your assessment was not wrong. It was a snapshot of a single moment in a very long trajectory. She paused. We found your vaults during a period of severe crisis. Our civilization had damaged its own biosphere nearly beyond recovery. Our population had crashed. In that wreckage, a geological survey team broke through the ceiling of Vault Complex 7 and found a storage facility built by a species that had crossed the stars while we were still learning to smelt iron. The discovery changed us. Your vaults were proof that interstellar civilization was possible. That proof came when our own civilization was in danger of giving up. It gave us a reason to keep building. Walk with me, she said. I will show you what you came for. The cascade began the next morning. Salith restructured the engineering assignments to place Cole as her direct technical liaison. Officially, this was within her authority. Practically, it put a human within arm's reach of the Empress for most of the working day, and the court noticed within hours. Whispers moved through the galleries, a human in the upper levels, a human summoned to private chambers, a human who looked at the Empress without lowering his eyes. Elder Counselor Thanes requested a private audience on day 18. Your Grace, he said, the human's placement has raised questions. Questions from whom? The roster candidates. Consul Soreth in particular has expressed concern that the human's proximity may create an appearance of impropriety. Salith leaned back in her chair. Consul Soreth is concerned about appearances. How thoughtful. Please inform the consul that the Empress's scheduling of her own staff is not subject to the roster's approval. And Thanes. If the consul has concerns about impropriety, he should examine his own financial entanglements with the Orthari mining syndicate before he examines my engineering department. Thanes went pale. He bowed and left. She had known about the mining syndicate for months. She had kept the information in reserve, a blade beneath her robes, waiting for the moment it would be needed. Power was not volume. Power was timing. But Draven Soreth was not a man who retreated from a single cut. On day 20, a formal petition appeared before the Dominion Council. 7 members signed it. The petition invoked the Purity Statutes, a clause in the charter that had not been activated in 200 years. It stated that any non-Ketharan individual in prolonged proximity to the imperial person must be reviewed by the Genetic Oversight Board for contamination risk. The language was archaic and ugly, written during the Blight Wars when an off-world plague had killed 30% of the Ketharan population. The statutes treated non-Ketharans as biological threats first and people second. The fact that anyone would invoke them now was a measure of how threatened Draven felt and how far he was willing to go. Salith read the petition at her desk alone. Her hands shook, not with fear, with a fury so controlled it could have powered the Spire's reactors. They were calling Cole a contaminant. She found him in the maintenance bay on level 15, recalibrating a pressure valve. He had his sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with coolant, face lit by the amber glow of the diagnostic panel. He looked up when she entered. The council invoked the Purity Statutes, she said. Cole set down the valve wrench. What does that mean? It means they want you removed, examined, catalogued, possibly confined. Because I'm human. Because you are human, and you are near me, and they cannot tolerate what that implies. Cole looked at her. His face was steady, weathered. He did not flinch. What are you going to do? Salith sat down on a maintenance crate, her indigo robes pooling on the oil-stained floor, and she laid out the plan. She could not fight the purity statutes head-on. The council had the votes, but the statutes had a clause buried in Subarticle 9. If the individual under review had performed a direct service to the imperial bloodline, the Empress could invoke a sovereign exception, declaring the individual a protected asset. The exception superseded the purity statutes and could not be overridden without a two-thirds supermajority Draven did not have. The clamp, Cole said. The clamp, you saved my niece. 17 people, documented, logged, witnessed. You planned this. I remembered the law. There is a difference. No, you planned it. Salith was silent for 3 heartbeats. I brought you here because you fixed a clamp and filed a report about it. Everything after that, I have been building as I go. She filed the sovereign exception on day 21. Draven challenged it within 4 hours. The Genetic Oversight Board convened an emergency session. Thanes tried to mediate and was overruled. Through all of it, Cole went to work. He repaired the pressure valve. He fixed a water recycling pump on level 31. He replaced worn bearings in the central elevator shaft, a job requiring 6 hours suspended in the shaft. He identified a microfracture in the observation deck's outer hull panel and sealed it with a compound he mixed himself. He showed up, did the job, went back to his quarters. The court raged, and he kept his head down and his hands busy. On day 22, Drellies did something unprecedented. She assigned Cole to lead a repair team. 3 junior Ketharan engineers, including Voss, under his direction, to replace a failing atmospheric processor on level 9. It was Drellies making an engineering decision, not a political one. The processor was repaired in 4 hours. Voss told Cole it was the cleanest install he had ever participated in. Day 23. The Genetic Oversight Board ruled the sovereign exception valid but conditional. Cole could remain, but contact with the Empress must be supervised. A chaperone assigned. Salith accepted the ruling publicly. The chaperone was Illith, a junior archivist assigned because she was considered harmless. What the council did not know was that Illith's mother had been removed from the approved roster 15 years earlier for suggesting consort selection should consider temperament alongside genetics. The opinion was suppressed. Sethana was exiled. Illith had grown up watching her mother's career, destroyed by the same system targeting Cole. Illith was not an obstacle. Illith was an ally. Under Illith's supervision, Salith and Cole continued to meet, technically compliant. Illith spent most meetings reading archival documents in the corner. The night before the ceremony, Salith did not sleep. She sat in her study, the circlet on the desk beside her, the data slates dark, the blue light from the window casting long shadows across the room. She had run every calculation. She had mapped every contingency. She had prepared responses to 17 different legal challenges and drafted 4 separate speeches, each calibrated to a different configuration of council opposition. But the calculation that kept her awake was not legal. It was personal. She was about to stand in front of every person who had ever looked through her and say, "This human sees me." This human, who welded a clamp on a relay station and filed a report about it, who crawled through ventilation shafts and replaced filters and never complained, who taught a junior engineer how to wire a panel correctly, and who ate alone in a mess hall where nobody would sit with him. This human looked at me and saw a person, and the fact that nobody else in this empire has done that in 30 years is the indictment I am delivering, not of a system, of all of you. She picked up the circlet. It was cold in her hands. She put it on, adjusted it, felt the familiar weight settle against her temples. "Tomorrow," she said to the empty room. The prerogative had a procedural requirement that Salith had not mentioned to Cole, because it was not something he needed to carry. Before the declaration could be made in open court, the Empress was required to submit a sealed written statement to the Archivist General, detailing the basis for the recognition. The statement would be preserved in the Imperial Archives for all time. It was a document that future historians would read, future empresses would study, and future councils would cite in legal arguments for or against the precedent she was about to set. Salith wrote it herself. No scribe, no advisor, no legal scholar. She sat at her desk at 3 in the morning and wrote in longhand in the formal script of the old charter a document that said, "He fixed a clamp because people might die. He filed a report. He showed up. He never asked for anything. He spoke to me as if I were a person. I am a person. That is the basis." She sealed it, delivered it to the Archivist General at dawn, and went to prepare for court. On day 25, Draven made his real move. He arrived at the throne room during open court and requested a formal audience. The galleries were full, every seat, the full council on their elevated platform, diplomatic corps in the balcony, news feeds live to every colony. "Your Grace," he said, his voice carrying the length of the hall, "I wish to formalize my candidacy for Imperial Consort, in accordance with the traditional rights of the approved roster." The room held its breath. This was the weapon. If Draven formalized in open court, the charter required the Empress to respond within 30 days, accept, reject with documented cause, or defer. Draven's bloodline was pristine, his diplomatic credentials flawless. Rejecting him without cause meant constitutional crisis. Deferring meant investigation. The investigation would find everything. The midnight walks, the reassigned schedules, the conversations. He had built a trap with no exit. Salith looked at him from the throne. Her face betrayed nothing. Cole was not in the throne room. He was on level 12, replacing a heat exchanger. She had made sure of that. "The Empress acknowledges the consul's candidacy," she said. "The response period begins today." Draven bowed. His smile was small and certain. That night, Salith went to Cole's quarters. Illith followed, sat in the corner chair, opened a volume on pre-charter agricultural regulations, and began reading with the focused attention of a woman determined to witness nothing. Cole was sitting on the edge of his bed, boots off, a mug in his hands. "Draven Sareth filed a formal consort candidacy today, in open court. I have 30 days. Cole set down the mug. She told him the 3 options. Accept Draven, and the machine runs as designed, and she marries a man who looks at her the way a general looks at a fortification. Reject him without cause, and the council overrides her. Defer, and they investigate and find everything." "Is there a 4th option?" he asked. Article 12, Section 4. The sovereign prerogative of the heart, not invoked in 400 years. The last Empress who invoked it was deposed. "Tell me." "It allows the Empress to declare a bond of personal recognition with any individual regardless of species, bloodline, or roster status. Not a marriage, not a consort appointment. A declaration that this person is essential to the function of the imperial person, permanent protected status, cannot be removed by any legal mechanism. And the prerogative suspends all pending consort candidacies for the duration of the bond. You'd be declaring, in front of your entire empire, that a human maintenance worker is essential to you. Yes, they would never forgive you. Some of them, not all. Illith wouldn't." From the corner, the soft sound of a page turning. "Drelly's included my name on the last 3 repair reports. She wouldn't. The last Empress who did this was deposed. Empress Lyrathin. She invoked the prerogative for a charming noble from a rival house. He betrayed her within a year. I am not choosing a charming noble. I am choosing a man who fixed a clamp because someone might die and who has never once asked me for anything. She held his gaze. I am not asking you to be a consort. I am not asking you to rule. I am asking you to let me tell the truth, in front of all of them. The truth is that you are the first person who has ever spoken to me without wanting something from me. You fixed a clamp because it was right. You showed up every day and did the work. And that, in a palace built on transaction and leverage, is the most revolutionary act I have ever witnessed. Cole's throat worked. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred. If you do this, they will try to destroy you. They have been trying to destroy me since I took the throne. The difference is that now I have something worth protecting. The prerogative ceremony took place on day 27, 3 days before Draven's response deadline. The throne room was full beyond capacity. Every seat, every balcony, diplomatic corps in formal regalia, news feeds live to every colony. Draven stood in the front row of the council platform. Cole stood at the center of the hall. He wore clean maintenance coveralls. He had asked Salith that morning if he should change into something formal, and she had said, "Wear what you are. That is the point." Salith descended from the throne. She walked the length of the hall in silence, her indigo robes trailing on the obsidian floor, her circlet catching the blue light. The room was so quiet that Cole could hear the fabric brushing the stone. She stopped in front of him. She was a full head taller. She looked down at him, and for the first time since he had arrived, she did not hide what was in her eyes. "Cole Vasic," she said, and her voice carried to every corner. "4 months ago you repaired a failing docking clamp on the Varath relay hub. You saved 17 lives, including Princess Lyarth of the Imperial bloodline. You filed a maintenance report. You did not seek recognition. You did not seek reward." She paused. The silence was absolute. "When brought to this palace under the charter of obligations, you worked without complaint, without ambition, without pretense. You have been subjected to suspicion, prejudice, legal assault, and institutional contempt. You have been called a contaminant by people who have never built anything in their lives. And through all of it, you have conducted yourself with a dignity that shames this court." Somewhere in the galleries, a data slate clattered to the floor. "Under Article 12, Section 4 of the Charter, I invoke the sovereign prerogative of the heart. I declare Cole Vasic essential to the function of the imperial person. He is granted permanent protected status. His presence is not subject to the purity statutes, the Genetic Oversight Board, or the review of any council body. All pending consort candidacies are hereby suspended." Draven's mask cracked, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched behind his back. Salith was not finished. "I will speak plainly, because this court has heard enough ceremony to last another 400 years. This man is not my consort. He is not my husband. He is not a candidate for the bloodline. He is a structural engineer who fixes things that are broken. And the most broken thing in this dominion was the assumption that the Empress is a function and not a person." She turned to Cole. "Do you accept?" Cole looked at her. The Empress of the Dominion of Cathara, 7 feet tall, standing in front of her entire civilization, and saying out loud the thing everyone had been pretending was not real. "Yes," he said. Salith nodded, just once, and if her eyes glistened, if the dark reflective surface of them caught the light differently for a moment, she did not acknowledge it, and neither did he. What the room had witnessed was not tears, it was recognition. Cole had not spoken during the ceremony. He had not needed to. His one word had done more work than all the speeches and statutes combined, because it was not a legal response. It was a man standing in the center of a room that had spent weeks trying to expel him, wearing his work clothes, looking at a woman who had just told the truth about herself for the first time in 30 years and saying, "I see you. I accept it." The galleries had emptied slowly. The diplomatic corps filed out first, data slates transmitting analysis to their governments. The council departed in clusters, voices low, faces drawn. Draven remained in his seat for a full minute after the room cleared, staring at the empty throne before rising and walking out without a word. Cole returned to the engineering wing and finished recalibrating the atmospheric processor. The Empress had just declared him essential in front of her entire civilization, and he went back to work, because the processor needed finishing, and the people on level 9 needed clean air. Drellies found him in the maintenance bay afterward. She stood in the doorway, her steel-gray face unreadable, and then she said, "The ceremony. I watched the feed." Cole looked up and... Drellies was quiet for a long time. Then, the coolant line on day 3, "I should have put your name on that report." "It's fine." "No, it is not fine. It was wrong. I am correcting the log." She left. Cole sat in the maintenance bay for a moment, alone, and something in his chest loosened that had been tight since the day he arrived. She gestured toward the corridor. "Your escort will help your crew begin the transfer. We have transport containers designed to your atmospheric specifications, manufactured last year in anticipation of your arrival window. The transfer will take approximately 6 days. During that time, you and your crew are welcome aboard the ring. We have quarters prepared." "You had quarters prepared," Voron said. "For 11,000 years, updated with each renovation cycle. The current furnishings were installed 37 years ago, based on updated anthropometric projections. We were not certain when you would arrive. We intended to be ready whenever you did." Voron followed her out of the vault. Behind him, the heavy door stood open for the first time in 26,000 years of human guardianship, and the air from 2 eras mixed in the threshold. In the corridor beyond, Voron passed a window. Earth hung in the lower frame, blue and white and impossibly green, dressed in the silver thread of the equatorial ring. Above it, 2 human warships crossed on patrol, their hulls catching the sun, their scale so vast the mind refused to process them as single objects. They looked like weather systems. They looked like the answer to a question the Cathari ascendancy had never thought to ask. What happens when a civilization decides that its highest purpose is not conquest but custody? Rayleigh stood beside him at the window. "Cleric Commander, when we return to the ascendancy, the High Synod will ask for a military assessment." "And what will you tell them?" "I will tell them that asking whether Earth is a threat is the wrong question. Earth is not a threat. Earth is a fact. The largest, most advanced, most thoroughly prepared infrastructure I have ever seen. Calling it a threat is like calling a mountain range a threat. You do not fight a mountain range. You make peace with it. There are no other options." He paused. "Something else. Those patrol vessels are old, not obsolete, the opposite. Upgraded generation after generation, the way a family maintains a house across centuries. Core frames older than the ring's current architecture. Those ships have been in continuous service for thousands of years." "What does that tell you?" "The Ascendancy scrapped 3 fleet generations in my lifetime because the maintenance costs exceeded the budget. The humans have been maintaining individual warships for longer than we have maintained our government." "We have a great deal to learn," Voron said quietly, "if they will teach us." Director Marrow's aide led them to a briefing room where a woman named Keeper Len Tavarick, senior continuity archivist for Vault Complex 7, waited behind a table. On the table sat a bound volume of physical paper, thick as a brick, its cover worn smooth by handling. "This is the continuity log," Keeper Tavarick said, in slow, careful old Cathari. "The physical record of every inspection, maintenance action, and atmospheric adjustment performed on Vault Complex 7 since initial access. Year 14,200 of our era. That is a single copy. The 23rd volume. The previous 22 are archived. The first was handwritten." She opened the book to a page near the middle. Small, dense, handwritten text. This entry is from 612 years ago. It reads, Atmospheric trace compound refresh completed. Cathari standard gas mixture verified at 99.97% specification. Sulfur compound ratio adjusted by 0.003% to compensate for source material decay. Next refresh scheduled for year 25,640. She closed the book. Every 52 years, a continuity archivist refreshes the trace compounds. The schedule has been maintained without interruption for 26,000 years. I am the current archivist. My predecessor held the post for 41 years. Before her, Tren Salavi for 38. The records go back name by name through the entire history of the program. Voron did the arithmetic. 26,000 years divided by 52 was 500 atmospheric refreshes. 500 times, a human had walked into a vault built by a species they had never met, checked the air quality against a 40,000-year-old specification, made adjustments measured in thousandths of a percent, logged the results, and scheduled the next refresh. Why handwritten? He asked. Because digital systems fail, Keeper Taverick said. We have backed the vault records digitally many times, and each digital system has eventually required migration. The physical log requires no platform. It requires only paper, ink, and a hand willing to write. We have never lacked for any of those three. 500 handwritten entries, 23 volumes, a chain of archivists stretching back to a time when the Cathari Ascendancy still held 20 star systems. The humans had been writing in books while the Ascendancy lost its wars, lost its territories, lost its archives, lost its confidence, and finally sent a pilgrimage ship back to recover what it had thrown away. Voron touched the cover of the continuity log. It was warm. Thousands of hands had held this book and its predecessors. Thousands of human lives dedicated in part to maintaining a vault that belonged to another species. Keeper Taverick, on behalf of the Cathari Ascendancy, I thank you, and every keeper before you. The old woman nodded. Matter of fact, she had been doing her job. The job had been its own justification for 26,000 years. Voron walked to his observation deck in silence. Raeleth beside him. Neither spoke. A book full of handwritten maintenance entries. A chain of custodians who had each dedicated a portion of their single, brief human life to keeping a dead civilization's air supply at the correct sulfur ratio. He reached the observation deck, a quiet space softly lit with a curved window facing Earth, a chair near the window, not a human chair. A Cathari sitting frame, built to accommodate the specific geometry of Cathari legs and the weight distribution of a body armored in chest plates. The angles exact, the materials correct, calibrated for a Cathari of Voron's age and build. Someone had built him a chair, not generic, designed from the anthropometric data in the seed vault records, adjusted for an elder Cathari male. 11,000 years of preparation, and they had thought about the chair. On the small table beside the chair, a sealed container. He opened it. A Cathari meal pressed grain cakes, dried protein strips, a flask of mineral-rich water with the iron and sulfur ratio that Cathari physiology craved. Synthesized clearly but flawless. The grain cakes had the correct crumble texture. The protein strips the right chewiness. The water tasted of the refectory on the old survey ship, before the wars, before the losses, before the long decline. He sat down. The frame took his weight perfectly. Earth turned below him, slow and blue and patient. The orbital traffic moved in ordered streams. The warships patrolled. The ring hummed with the life of a civilization that measured its commitments in millennia. Dareth's voice came over the internal comm. Cleric Commander, the human transfer crews are requesting access to Cargo Bay 4. They have brought containers, atmospheric sealed, Cathari spec, manufactured to the exact dimensions listed in your original vault packing manifest. They want to know if we prefer to supervise the packing or trust their protocols. Tell them we trust their protocols, he said. Then after a pause, and Dareth. Cleric Commander. When the transfer is complete, draft a formal communication to the High Synod. Highest priority. Secure channel. What shall it say? Tell them the vaults are intact. Tell them that Earth preserved everything we left behind. Tell them that the species we classified as irrelevant has become the most advanced civilization I have ever encountered, and they achieved it not through conquest but through the decision to keep faith with what was placed in their care. He paused. And tell them that Earth has extended an invitation, not to pilgrims, to neighbors. Tell the Synod I recommend we accept. That will not be popular, Cleric Commander. The Synod does not accept advice from species they have not classified. Then tell them to update their classifications. The old ones are 40,000 years out of date. Below him, Earth kept turning. It had been turning for 4.5 billion years, through ice ages and mass extinctions, and the rise and fall of species beyond counting. And somewhere in that long turning, while continents drifted and species rose and fell like breath, one species had decided that the measure of a civilization was not what it conquered, but what it kept safe. Not what it took, but what it preserved. Not how far it reached, but how long it remembered. They had built a ring around their world and warships in their sky and defense grids across their continents, and all of it existed to protect a single idea, that what is entrusted to your care must be maintained, regardless of who left it, regardless of whether they return, regardless of how long the watch must last. The Cathari ascendancy had come to retrieve what it had lost. What it found was a world that had never lost anything at all. Voron leaned back in the chair built for him across 11,000 years of patient waiting, and he watched Earth through the window, and he did not speak again for a long time. There was nothing left to say that the planet below him had not already said quietly, patiently, with the voice of a people who had chosen to remember when every easier path led to forgetting. Voron thought of the survey file, Tier 0 sentience, pre-spaceflight, no military capacity, no threat classification. Every word had been true at the time it was written, and every word was a monument to the most dangerous assumption any civilization could make, that the present is permanent. The vaults were open, the heritage was intact, the watch was over. And Earth, as it always had, endured. The court took 3 days to settle. Draven was escorted from the palace under guard, not as a prisoner, but as a man whose clearances had been revoked and whose presence was no longer sanctioned. His legal scholar filed 7 motions in the following 72 hours, all dismissed by the Constitutional Review Board. The warden captain resigned his commission and was permitted to retain his pension, because Salith had meant what she said about remembering that he was misled. Thanes requested an audience on the 2nd day. He entered the study with none of the calculated concern he usually wore. He looked old and tired, and honest for the first time since Salith had known him. "Your Grace," he said, "I owe you an apology." "You owe me 30 years of apologies, Thanes, but I will accept this one." "I did not see what the humans saw." "No one did, that was the problem." Thanes nodded slowly. "The prerogative stands, the council accepts it. There will be no further challenges from my office." He paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Your Grace, the engineer's repair work is exceptional. Drellies tells me the spire has not been in better condition in a decade." "I know," Salith said. "I chose well." In the engineering wing, the shift was quieter but no less real. Drellies assigned Cole to permanent upper-level structural oversight, not as a political accommodation, and not because the Empress had requested it, but because the repair logs justified the assignment, and because Drellies, whatever her initial reservations, was an engineer first and a politician never. Voss began eating lunch at Cole's table. He did not speak much, but he brought an extra portion of the carbohydrate-dense bread that the mess kitchen stocked for off-world visitors, and he set it beside Cole's tray without comment. On the third day, 2 other junior engineers joined the table. On the fourth, Drellies walked past, saw the cluster of her staff eating with the human, and said nothing. The Constitutional Review Board dismissed Draven's challenge unanimously on day 32. The sovereign prerogative stood. Cole's protected status was confirmed. The approved roster remained intact as an institution, but the consort selection process was formally suspended for the duration of the recognized bond, which had no specified end date. On the third evening after the confrontation, Salith found Cole on the observation deck, the highest accessible point of the spire. Below them, the city burned with light. Above, the sky had cleared, and the stars of the Ketharan system were dense and bright. She stood beside him, not touching, not speaking, just present. "You could have done all of that without the prerogative," Cole said. "The financial records alone would have finished Draven." "Yes." "So the prerogative wasn't about stopping him?" "No. It was about saying it out loud." Salith looked out at the city. "I have spent my entire reign making decisions in private, calculations, maneuvers, leveraged silences. I wanted once to say the thing that was true, in front of everyone, without calculating what it would cost." Cole turned to face her. In the starlight, his weathered face looked older and kinder than it had any right to. "You're still calculating. You're just better at it than they are." The ghost of a smile crossed her face, not the mask of the Empress, but the real expression of the woman underneath. "Perhaps, but the part about you being essential was not a calculation. That was the only honest sentence I have spoken from that throne." "I know." Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a bolt. Standard alloy, slightly corroded, with a hairline fracture running through the threads. The bolt he had replaced on Junction 9, Berth 16, the one that had started everything. He held it out to her. Salith looked at it. A piece of metal the size of her thumb, corroded, cracked, ordinary, the fulcrum on which 2 lives had turned. She took it from his palm. Her fingers, long and gray, closed around it carefully, the way one holds something that is simultaneously worthless and invaluable. She pressed it against her sternum, held it there, against the place where the circlet would rest. "I'll keep this," she said. "I know," Cole said. They stood on the observation deck, side by side, looking at the stars. Not touching, not speaking. 2 people from different worlds who had found, in the machinery of obligation and law and political maneuvering, something that no statute could regulate and no council could override and no blade, ceremonial or otherwise, could cut. Below them, the spire hummed with the systems Cole had maintained. Above them, the sky held a galaxy of civilizations that would never fully understand what had happened here. An Empress had risked her throne for the radical act of being seen as a person. A structural engineer had let her, not because he wanted anything from her, but because the alternative was walking away from something that was wrong, and he had never learned how to do that. In the doorway of the observation deck, Ilith sat with an archival document in her lap that she had not read a single word of. She was looking at the 2 figures by the window, and she was thinking of her mother, and thinking of a world where temperament mattered as much as blood, and thinking that perhaps it was already here. The stars burned. The city glowed. The bolt rested in the Empress's hand, small and cracked and ordinary and sufficient.